Hey everyone, it's Alex, and I am finally here with my video for the 76th Golden Globe Awards nominations. I'm sorry this video is coming several weeks after the nominations were announced, but I had fallen behind on other videos I was making and editing, and I wanted to also see some more of the movies that were nominated here so I could comment on them and whether or not I like their nominations, because when the Golden Globe nominations always come out, I always haven't seen all the contenders just because a lot of them may have only just come out in limited release and then don't get expanded into smaller cities like where I live until like weeks later. But now I am at the point where I have seen most of these movies, so I can comment on them. I had hoped to make this video before Christmas, but I wasn't able to. But I'm doing it now, better late than never. So, of course, as you guys may know, the Golden Globes are kind of the first big award show of any award season. They kick things off and they honor both television and film. And television, of course, they honor comedies, dramas, limited series, and in movies, like the television side, they split them into dramas and comedies, along with a few technical nominations. So sometimes the Golden Globes will indicate what goes on to win later at the Oscars and the Emmys. Sometimes they don't, because the winners and nominees can be interesting at times, shall we say, and sometimes to the point of generating a lot of controversy, but hopefully there shouldn't be too much of that this year in terms of controversial nominees. But what I'm going to do, like I've always done, is I'm going to announce all the nominees without commenting first. I'll do the television categories first, and the film categories second, and then I'll go back and look at all the categories and comment about what I like, what I don't like, and what I think got snubbed. And the Golden Globes will be taking place this coming Sunday, January 6th on NBC at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, and will be hosted by Sandra Oh and Andy Samberg. So, without further ado, here are the nominations for the 76th Golden Globe Awards. Starting off with television. Best Actor in a Television Series, Comedy, or Musical. Sacha Baron Cohen, Who is America? Jim Carrey, Kidding. Michael Douglas, The Kominsky Method. Donald Glover, Atlanta. Bill Hader, Barry. Best Actress in a Television Series, Comedy, or Musical. Kristen Bell, The Good Place. Candice Bergen, Murphy Brown. Alison Brie, Glow. Rachel Brosnahan, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Deborah Messing, Will and Grace. Best Actor in a Television Series, Drama. Jason Bateman, Ozark. Stephen James, Homecoming. Richard Madden, Bodyguard. Billy Porter, Pose. Matthew Rhys, The Americans. Best Actress in a Television Series, Drama. Katrina Balfe, Outlander. Elizabeth Moss, The Handmaid's Tale. Sandra Oh, Killing Eve. Julia Roberts, Homecoming. Kerry Russell, The Americans. Best Actor in a Limited Series or Motion Picture Made for Television. Antonio Banderas, Genius Picasso. Daniel Bruhl, The Alienist. Darren Criss, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, American Crime Story. Benedict Cumberbatch, Patrick Melrose. Hugh Grant, A Very English Scandal. Best Actress in a Limited Series or Motion Picture Made for Television. Amy Adams, Sharp Objects. Patricia Arquette, Escape at Dannemora. Connie Britton, Dirty John. Laura Dern, The Tale. Regina King, 7 Seconds. Best Supporting Actor in a Series, Limited Series, or Motion Picture Made for Television. Alan Arkin, The Kominsky Method. Kieran Culkin, Succession. Edgar Ramirez, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, American Crime Story. Ben Whishaw, A Very English Scandal. Henry Winkler, Barry. Best Supporting Actress in a Series, Limited Series, or Motion Picture Made for Television. Alex Borstein, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Patricia Clarkson, Sharp Objects. Penelope Cruz, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, American Crime Story. Tandy Newton, Westworld. Yvonne Strahovski, The Handmaid's Tale. Best Television Series, Comedy or Musical. Barry, The Good Place, Kidding, The Kominsky Method, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Best Television Series, Drama. The Americans, Bodyguard, Homecoming, Killing Eve, Pose. Best Limited Series or Motion Picture made for television. The Alienist, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, American Crime Story, Escape at Dannemora, Sharp Objects, A Very English Scandal. And now onto the film nominations. Best Original Score, Motion Picture. Ludwig Göransson, Black Panther. Justin Hurwitz, First Man. Alexander Desplat, Isle of Dogs. Mark Shaman, Mary Poppins Returns. Marco Beltrami, A Quiet Place. Best Original Song, Motion Picture. All the Stars, from Black Panther. Music and lyrics by Kendrick Lamar, Anthony Tippett, Mark Spears, Solana Rowe, and Al Shuckburg. Girl in the Movies, from Dumplin'. Music and lyrics by Dolly Parton and Linda Perry. Requiem for a Private War, from A Private War. Music and lyrics by Annie Lennox. Revelation, from Boy Erased. Music by Troye Sivan and John Z. Lyrics by John Thor Bjergesen, Troye Sivan, and Brett McLaughlin. Shallow, from A Star is Born. Music and lyrics by Lady Gaga, Mark Ronson, Anthony Rossimondo, and Andrew Wyatt. Best Animated Feature. Incredibles 2, Isle of Dogs, Mirai, Ralph Breaks the Internet, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Best Foreign Language Film. Capernaum from Lebanon, or it might be pronounced Capernaum. I keep hearing different ways of how it's being pronounced, so I'm going to have to look that up when I'm editing this. Girl, Belgium. Never Look Away, Germany. Roma, Mexico. Shoplifters, Japan. Best Screenplay Motion Picture. Deborah Davis and Tony McNamara, The Favorite. Nick Vallelonga, Brian Curry, and Peter Farrelly, Green Book. Barry Jenkins, If Beale Street Could Talk. Alfonso Cuarón, Roma. Adam McKay, Vice. Best Supporting Actor in a Motion Picture. Mahershala Ali, Green Book. Timothy Chalamet, Beautiful Boy. Adam Driver, Black Klansman. Richard E. Grant, Can You Ever Forgive Me? Sam Rockwell, Vice. Best Supporting Actress in a Motion Picture. Amy Adams, Vice. Claire Foy, First Man. Regina King, If Beale Street Could Talk. Emma Stone, The Favorite. Rachel Weisz, The Favorite. Best Actor in a Motion Picture, Comedy, or Musical. Christian Bale, Vice. Lin-Manuel Miranda, Mary Poppins Returns. Viggo Mortensen, Green Book. Robert Redford, The Old Man and the Gun. John C. Reilly, Stan and Ollie. Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Comedy, or Musical. Emily Blunt, Mary Poppins Returns. Olivia Colman, The Favorite. Elsie Fisher, 8th Grade. Charlize Theron, Tully. Constance Wu, Crazy Rich Asians. Best Actor in a Motion Picture, Drama. Bradley Cooper, A Star is Born. Willem Dafoe, At Eternity's Gate. Lucas Hedges, Boy Erased. Rami Malek, Bohemian Rhapsody. John David Washington, Black Klansman. Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Drama. Glenn Close, The Wife. Lady Gaga, A Star is Born. Nicole Kidman, Destroyer. Melissa McCarthy, Can You Ever Forgive Me? Rosamund Pike, A Private War. Best Director Motion Picture: Spike Lee, Black Klansman; Peter Farrelly, Green Book; Alfonso Cuarón, Roma; Bradley Cooper, A Star is Born; Adam McKay, Vice. Best Motion Picture Comedy or Musical: Crazy Rich Asians, The Favorite, Green Book, Mary Poppins Returns, Vice. And finally, Best Motion Picture Drama: Black Panther, Black Klansman, Bohemian Rhapsody, If Beale Street Could Talk, A Star is Born. And those are the nominations for the 76 Golden Globe Awards. So now I'm going to give you my thoughts about them. For the television categories, I admit I'm not going to be able to comment on these as much because I focus more on film, and so therefore I fall behind on a lot of television shows. Like, there are some shows that I have never even watched a single episode of. For instance, The Americans. It just aired its final season, and while I have kind of read the plot summaries of like the various seasons and stuff just to see what all the fuss was about, I mean, I knew the basic premise of it, but I never really knew the in-depth storylines. So I followed the spoiler reviews and things like that, but I've never watched a single episode. I've watched some shows like The Handmaid's Tale, although I haven't finished all of it. But I've heard a lot about some of these shows. I can talk about what's considered a surprise or a snub. Like for Best Actor in a Television Series, Comedy or Musical, I don't really think anybody saw Sacha Baron Cohen getting a nomination for Who is America, because that hasn't really struck to me as like a typical sitcom, because it's him in all these disguises trying to interview people, particularly right-wing politicians who are very controversial, like the Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore, who was accused of molesting several teenage girls. He was one of the people that Sacha Baron Cohen interviewed under a disguise and everything. So I sense this is more of a nomination in regards to a commentary on the political climate rather than a nomination about being genuinely good. And I heard that Sacha Baron Cohen isn't necessarily planning to bring back the series, although maybe that was a wrong rumor, but I haven't heard it to be an ongoing thing. And as for the rest, I mean, Donald Glover and Bill Hader, of course, people would expect them to be here. And I've heard interesting things about the Kominsky Method, but haven't watched it. But Michael Douglas, of course, is an iconic actor. You know, he's a big name. He's mostly known for being a big name movie star. And if you're a big name movie star and you do television, the Golden Globes will automatically tend to nominate you, even if, regardless of how well received the show is. Well, okay, maybe not that far. But usually movie stars that go to television usually pick shows that do end up getting substantial critical acclaim. So there aren't really that many out there who've starred in something absolutely awful. And then for Best Actress in a Television Series, Comedy or Musical, you know, got a lot of new... I know a lot of people are probably happy about The Good Place being in here, although Ted Danson seems to have been surprisingly snubbed over in the actor race. I think many people thought he'd be nominated in the slot that Sacha Baron Cohen has. But I know a lot of people love The Good Place as a show. I haven't had a chance to watch it, but it's one of those shows that just seems to be growing in terms of the number of fans it gets every season. So a lot of people will be happy to see that, as well as returning nominees like Alison Brie and Rachel Brosnahan. And Will and Grace is interesting because last year Eric McCormack was the only nominee from this new revival, and now Deborah Messing is the only nominee. And I believe this brings the show's total nominations from both its original and revival run to 30, because Will and Grace has infamously been nominated for many Golden Globes but never ever won. I don't know if that's going to happen this year. It probably won't, but clearly some voters are still fans of the show. And then Candice Bergen for Murphy Brown. That's an interesting case here, mainly because this new revival of Murphy Brown hasn't exactly been well received by critics. Maybe not like completely downright awful in terms of reviews, but many feeling like it wasn't really all that necessary, and admittedly it's being done just primarily for the characters, because Murphy Brown is a TV journalist who primarily comments on things like politics. Clearly, it was created to specifically comment on the politics of the Trump presidency, and I'm technically all for that because politically I can't stand Trump at all. So I assume, kind of like Sacha Baron Cohen, this is more of a nomination in terms of making a statement about politics rather than the merit of the role itself, it seems, but then again, it could also be the revival factor playing in here, because Murphy Brown already won tons of awards in its original run, and I guess Golden Globe voters may feel they don't need to reward it substantially again. For Best Actor in a Television Series Drama, this is definitely where we see the new factor come into play, because the Golden Globes always love to cram their TV categories with brand new shows, and they often infamously nominate shows across the board in their first season and then either significantly reduce the number of nominations or completely cut them off in subsequent seasons, which is kind of what we're seeing with Outlander, because that show did pretty well at the Globes in its first season, but now its only nomination is for its main actress, Katrina Balfe, and no one else. But you got a lot of newcomers like Stephen James for Homecoming, Richard Madden for Bodyguard, Billy Porter for Pose, Julia Roberts for Homecoming, again bringing in the movie star factor, Sandra Oh for Killing Eve, and some people might be thinking, is she only being nominated because she's also hosting? And my quick answer to that is no, because Killing Eve was one of the most critically acclaimed TV shows of the past year, and she of course was nominated at the Emmys, and when you tend to get nominated at the Emmys, you tend to, especially in your first season, you also tend to get nominated at the Globes as well. So could her hosting possibly increasing her chances of win? Maybe. I mean, Amy Poehler famously won a Golden Globe for Parks and Recreation during one of the years that she hosted the show with Tina Fey. So, and I've often noticed several times of people hosting award shows and also being nominated at them and then winning. Like David Hyde Pierce won his third Emmy for Frasier in the year that he hosted the Emmy Awards, and Hugh Jackman won his Tony Award for The Boy from Oz when he hosted the Tony Awards in 2004. Granted, not every host automatically wins. James Franco hosted the 2011 Oscars, where he was a nominee for Best Actor for 127 Hours, but he lost to Colin Firth for The King's Speech because, frankly, Colin Firth had such a lock that none of the other nominees had a chance against him. And then we're seeing a drop-off in The Handmaid's Tale, because last year it dominated huge with nominations all across the board, but now it's been shut out of the drama race, and its only nominations are just 2 acting nominations for Elizabeth Moss and then Yvonne Strahovski in the catch-all supporting category. And then sometimes the Golden Globes, very rarely, but in this case it did happen, where they ignore a show for most of its run and then finally recognize it in like its last season, which is what they're doing here with The Americans, which hasn't really done that well at many award shows. Maybe its theme of Russian spies pretending to be Americans and spying against America for Russia in the 1980s might have turned some awards voters off for a while. It's kind of similar to Breaking Bad, which, while it did well at the Emmys, it infamously did not do well at the Globes at all until its final season, when I think they said, okay, let's finally reward it. Maybe that'll happen here. Who knows? Although in the drama race, one thing I'm very surprised to see, and a little upset actually about, is the complete shutout of This Is Us. I think the cast is still doing very strong work. Sterling K. Brown won this award last year, and I would have been nice to see him at least nominated again, but here, doesn't show up at all, and none of his other castmates are nominated here either. Like Mandy Moore and Chrissy Metz have gotten nominations in the past. They're not here at all. It would have been nice to see Justin Hartley get some nominations, because he was egregiously snubbed at the Emmys earlier this year, and it would have been nice to see him get recognized for something. But what I'm also surprised about is Milo Ventimiglia. He's gotten some love at the Emmys, although he's never won there, but I would have hoped at least his Vietnam storyline, as well as the storyline involving How Jack Really Died would have helped him be recognized by voters here with at least a nomination, but nope, and it's a shame, it really is. Then for the limited series categories, pretty standard, very similar lineup from the Emmys, like with Antonio Banderas, Darren Criss. If he weren't in here, I'm sure people would have been outraged, just given the massive amount of acclaim for his performance in Assassination of Gianni Versace, and of course, he won the Emmy for that. Benedict Cumberbatch for Patrick Melrose, no surprise there. And then, of course, we got some contenders that won't be eligible till the Emmys this year, in later 2019, like Hugh Grant for A Very English Scandal, or Amy Adams for Sharp Objects, or Patricia Arquette for Escape at Dannemora. So you got those, and other returning contenders. Forgot to mention, you got Laura Dern for The Tale, Regina King for 7 Seconds, and then Connie Britton for Dirty John kind of surprised me, mainly because that's a miniseries that aired on the Bravo network, which really doesn't do a lot of scripted dramas, so I didn't really think it would have some kind of snob appeal that you need to get into an awards like this, but given that Connie Britton is a relatively well-respected actress, I guess that helped her here. Although I'm kind of a little surprised to see Daniel Bruhl in here for The Alienist, not because of him being bad or anything, and admittedly I haven't really seen The Alienist, but it just aired so long ago, back in January of 2018, that I thought it would have been completely out of sight from voters' minds just because of the time lapse, but I guess not. And then the supporting categories, which are all-encompassing to include TV shows, limited series, and TV movies. Of course, you got to have Henry Winkler in there for Barry. He finally won his very first Emmy back in September, to many people's delight, and maybe that'll help him win here, because sometimes movie star status or just icon status can help you win an award, at least at the Golden Globes. Sometimes, but not always, and I could see that helping Henry Winkler here, because of course everyone remembers him as Fonzie from Happy Days. And then of course you got the Gianni Versace players like Edgar Ramirez and Penelope Cruz. Got another Emmy winner, Thandie Newton, in here, as well as Alex Borstein. Of course you got the movie stars like Alan Arkin and Patricia Clarkson. Yvonne Strahovski had her story significantly expanded in The Handmaid's Tale to make her a more three-dimensional character, so no surprise to see her in here. Succession is really the only show I knew nothing about before these nominations came out. And apparently it's a show on HBO, and you would think a show on HBO would debut to a lot of fanfare, but this kind of flew under the radar. So I had no idea it even existed until the nomination was announced. So there's not really much I can say in these categories about snubs, just because a lot of these, like I said before, a lot of this stuff is things I haven't seen yet, and I don't know if I will ever see, because admittedly some of them don't really hold my interest, and others I'll just have to wait on my long list of TV stuff to catch up on, since my primary focus is on movies. So I won't really comment too much about the Best Series nominations themselves, because there's not really much I can say about them quality-wise. It's just that many of them are ones that you would expect to be in here, given what we saw at the Emmys, as well as the Globe's tendency to nominate the new programs a lot. And then as for the film categories, starting off with Best Original Score, I like a lot of these choices here a lot. First Man had an excellent score. Isle of Dogs, amazing score. Alexander Desplat is my second favorite film composer of all time, only behind John Williams. Mary Poppins Returns, of course, that would be in here. Absolutely beautiful, delightful score. Obviously, it's not as good as the iconic score by Richard and Robert Sherman from the original Mary Poppins, but that would be a tough task to live up to for any composer. But what we got here was pretty close, and that's good enough, at least for me. And then A Quiet Place. I wasn't really sure how well that movie would do here, and sadly this is its only nomination. But I'm glad to see this is in here, because A Quiet Place was really just a visual audio experience that was unlike anything I'd ever seen. So the music was, very important to the backdrop of the story, especially for how it relates to the whole theme of complete silence versus sound itself. I haven't seen Black Panther yet just because I've fallen behind on all the Marvel movies, and I haven't really listened to much of its score, so I can't really comment anything on there. I know a lot of people love it, and they're probably happy to see it in here. As for scores, I think we're snubbed from what I can think of. Widows had an epic score by Hans Zimmer. Maybe not epic in the same way as like Dunkirk or Inception or The Dark Knight. You know, is maybe a more quiet, subtle score, but when it hits, it really hits, especially in the last third of the movie when the heist takes place. The music there is just absolutely perfect and really elevates the level of tension. Another score that was shamefully overlooked is Thom Yorke's score for Suspiria, and yes, I do mean Thom Yorke from Radiohead. What he did with that movie was fantastic. It was just a perfect. It really created a sense of mystique and dread and anticipation, as only someone like Thom Yorke could do. BlacKkKlansman also had a very epic score, especially in the scenes where they're showcasing the inevitable showdown between the police force and the Ku Klux Klan. So it would have been nice to see that get recognized as well. But for the most part, this is a pretty solid list, so I don't really have too many complaints. For Best Original Song, All the Stars, pretty good song from what I've heard of it. I've only heard it in bits and pieces. Girl in the Movies, haven't heard that song. I didn't get a chance to watch Dumplin'. But Dolly Parton, of course, is an icon, so... And she's one of the few country artists whose songs I'll occasionally listen to, because I'm generally not a country music fan at all. I'm really glad to see Requiem for a Private War in here. That was a very haunting, beautiful song played in the end credits of that movie. It sent goosebumps down my arms. I wouldn't say it's as good of a song as, say, Into the West from Lord of the Rings: Return of the King, but which Annie Lennox also wrote and sang. But this song is still good on its own merit, and Annie Lennox, her voice is just a thing of beauty to listen to in it. Revelation from Boy Erased, I'm kind of torn on that song because I like kind of the piano melody of it, and the way it's sung isn't necessarily bad, but it kind of came off as almost robotic in a way. I mean, maybe not completely robotic, but I just maybe felt it needed a little more emotion to it. Not like overwhelming emotion, I don't need it to go that far, but like, I just felt it needed a little more oomph to it, you know, to really stick it, I guess. Shallow from A Star Is Born, of course that was going to be in here, because that song pretty much had a lock on this category from day one, and out of these nominees, it's definitely easy to see why. And while I really like Shallow a lot, I'm still a little upset that they couldn't nominate another song from A Star Is Born as well, namely my personal favorite song from the movie, which is the final song, I'll Never Love Again. When that song is sung at the end of the movie, I had to struggle to keep the tears back. I really did. I mean, it really gets to you when you listen to it, especially in the context of which it's sung in the movie. And it's a shame that I'll Never Love Again or Requiem for a Private War did not make the Oscar shortlist for Best Original Song, which I'll discuss when we get to that video. Another song I wish could have been in here is Hearts Beat Loud from Hearts Beat Loud. You know, that's a very music-centered movie with some amazing songs. And that one was my favorite of that movie, so it would have been nice to see that get recognized, but that came out way back in the summer in kind of a small, limited release, so I guess it just didn't get enough exposure. That's just too bad. For Best Animated Feature, no surprise here really with these movies, because these were all the most acclaimed movies of the year, and I'm at least glad the Golden Globes decided to go for mostly the acclaimed movies, because they often tend to go for ones that gross the most at the box office, even if they're not necessarily acclaimed by critics, like the Hotel Transylvania films. and I was fearing that they might do the same thing here with movies like Smallfoot or The Grinch, movies which made a decent amount of money but weren't necessarily the most acclaimed films that came out. But luckily they stuck towards mostly the critically acclaimed ones this time, even though many of them were quite big box office hits, like Incredibles 2, for instance, which just smashed the box office when it came out, because this was like the most anticipated Pixar sequel of all time. For Best Foreign Language Film, the only one of these I've seen is Roma, and that's very well deserved. I've heard a lot about these. Roma, Capernaum, Never Look Away, and Shoplifters, they all made the Oscar shortlist. Girl, many people thought would make the shortlist for the Oscars, but it didn't, because while it's been highly acclaimed by critics, it's come under a lot of fire from the transgender community, because while it depicts the story of a transgender girl trying to be a ballerina, from what I hear, it also did the controversial move of casting a cisgender actor to play a transgender character, and also there's some scenes I hear that are very uncomfortable and graphic to watch, and many felt those scenes went too far in what they were doing. So for Best Screenplay Motion Picture, this is always an interesting and sometimes frustrating category because they combine original and adapted screenplays into this one category. So you got a lot of well-deserved contenders, but it also shuts out several great contenders in the process. The Favorite is a great screenplay. Green Book, good movie and decent screenplay. I don't know if it's like the most awards worthy, but it's decent. If Beale Street Could Talk still hasn't come out in my area at the time I'm making this video. It comes out in a few days, so I really feel bad that I can't comment on it personally, but it is Barry Jenkins, and he did such a fantastic job with Moonlight, and I'm sure his nomination is probably very well deserved here. Roma, great screenplay. Vice, decent screenplay. I wouldn't say it's like awards worthy. There are many screenplays in here that were shamefully left off, like A Star is Born, Can You Ever Forgive Me, 8th Grade, First Reformed. All of those screenplays I feel would be better off being put in here rather than Green Book or Vice. Best Supporting Actor in a Motion Picture. 4 of these contenders are great. Mahershala Ali, great pick. Timothée Chalamet, great pick. Even if the movie itself had some problems, he was fantastic, so yeah, he's definitely deserving to be here. Adam Driver for BlacKkKlansman, absolutely. Richard E. Grant for Can You Ever Forgive Me, absolutely. Best Supporting Actor Performance of the Year, in my opinion. Sam Rockwell, Vice, he was good as George W. Bush, but his role was pretty small. While he was good in the limited time he had, I don't really think he made enough of an impact to justify a nomination here. Many people were very surprised, including me, to see Sam Elliott not here for A Star is Born. I really, even if I didn't necessarily feel he had enough material to warrant like a full nomination, he was at least better, I think, than Sam Rockwell in Vice. Russell Hornsby from The Hate U Give is also not in here. Then again, his chances of being nominated weren't really all that high, to be honest, but he gave a very powerful performance in that movie, and The Hate U Give is a movie I think that has flown way too much under the radar. Granted, it's a movie that deals with some very tough topics like racism, police brutality, Black Lives Matter, and movies about those subjects often don't do well at the box office because audiences want more lighthearted, fun entertainment. But The Hate U Give is one of those movies that you should at least watch once in your life just to see the seriousness of the subject matters on display. And everyone in the cast in The Hate U Give is really great, but Russell Hornsby definitely is one of the true standouts of that movie. So if you had taken Sam Rockwell out and put in Russell Hornsby, then this list would be perfect. For Best Supporting Actress in a Motion Picture, really solid list for the most part. Amy Adams, she's really good in Vice. I don't think she's necessarily good enough to win, but she does have some dynamite moments that make her worthy of being here, in my opinion. Claire Foy, First Man. At first, when I was watching First Man, I wasn't sure where all the hype was, because everyone was like, oh, Claire Foy is so incredible, and she was good, but it wasn't until like her final moment before her husband Neil Armstrong goes off into space and she says, "No, you tell the kids you might not be coming back because I can't do that anymore." That was kind of the aha moment. So I think that part alone is the main reason why she's in here, and I don't think she'll win, but I can't really argue against her inclusion for her being in here for that scene. Regina King, I've heard she's amazing in If Beale Street Could Talk, and I'm really bummed out that I couldn't see it before I made this video, because if I waited until after it came out here, then the Golden Globes would be over. But I'm sure I'll be talking about her performance in subsequent videos, especially when we come to the Oscars, and hopefully she gets nominated there. And then Emma Stone and Rachel Weisz for The Favorite. Both are well deserving to be in here. If you had to ask me which one of them I think is better, they're both quite excellent, but I'd say by a slight edge I'd give it to Emma Stone if I were personally forced to pick just between those two. But both of them are very fantastic as these women who are very conniving and manipulative towards Olivia Colman's Queen Anne, and what they do to try to gain her favor is very interesting to watch. For Best Actor in a Motion Picture, Comedy, or Musical, Christian Bale, Vice, of course he'd be in here. Vice wasn't necessarily my favorite movie in the world. I had some problems with it, but he was fantastic as Dick Cheney because he put on like 40 to 50 pounds because Christian Bale's a method actor and he's going to go there and do all the extremes, and he had all the prosthetics like with hair and maybe other like facial prosthetics as well to turn him into Dick Cheney, particularly when he's an older man and he's the vice president. I mean, he literally was Dick Cheney. I mean, it didn't feel like I was watching a portrayal of Dick Cheney. I felt like I was watching the real thing. That's what Christian Bale likes to do, and good for him. Lin-Manuel Miranda for Mary Poppins Returns, absolutely. Finally saw that film on New Year's Eve. He was fantastic and a very well chosen successor to Dick Van Dyke, because he's clearly playing the Dick Van Dyke role, more or less. Not literally Bert, but a character clearly meant to be the new version of Bert, more or less. Viggo Mortensen for Green Book. He was fantastic in that movie. Of course, there's the infamous N-word controversy where at a panel he was talking about language people use today versus language we use now. He said the N-word unfiltered to try and make a point, which got him a lot of backlash. According to the reports I read, his point of saying the N-word was to emphasize a certain point about racist language rather than use it for a racist slur himself. But it generated a lot of backlash nonetheless, and he did apologize for it. Will that cost him a win? I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if it does. But even without the controversy, the performance is still good, but not necessarily, in my opinion, good enough to fully win from these nominees. I personally go for Christian Bale if I had to personally vote. The other two nominees, one I can't comment on because I haven't seen, which is John C. Reilly and Stan and Ollie. I've heard he's fantastic, but the movie only just officially came out in limited release, and it doesn't come to my area for a couple more weeks. But of course, the Golden Globe voters get to see these movies well in advance of everyone else. And then Robert Redford in The Old Man and the Gun. He's really good in the movie, but when watching The Old Man and the Gun, never once did it come across to me that it was a comedy. I don't really see anything in it that is comedic in any sense. If someone can find justification for him being placed in this category rather than in the drama category, please explain it to me. I have a feeling he's mainly here just to make room for him because The Old Man and the Gun is allegedly going to be his very last acting role. He said he's retiring from acting, although then he said that wasn't exactly what he meant to say, that he still might be open to it. So whether or not this is his last acting role is yet to be seen, but I don't really think it belongs in the comedy category at all. And as a result, you've taken away 2 spots from 2 actors who I think could have been nominated here and should have been nominated here, and that would be Nick Robinson for Love, Simon and Lakeith Stanfield for Sorry to Bother You. Because while those movies, even though they're not your traditional comedies, they still have some heart and humor to them. One's a teen high school comedy and the other's more of a satire. But both of those actors are fantastic in those movies, and the Golden Globes would be like the perfect vehicle for them. For Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Musical, or Comedy, I have no problem with this lineup whatsoever. I think this is a perfect lineup. Emily Blunt, fantastic in Mary Poppins Returns. Obviously no one will ever be as good as Julie Andrews, but Emily Blunt comes pretty close, and she was just phenomenal. Olivia Colman, she was magnificent in The Favorite. She absolutely deserves all the awards attention she's getting. Elsie Fisher in 8th Grade, amazing performance. Her character, Kayla, felt very much like a real 8th grade kid and not necessarily just Hollywood's version of an 8th grade kid. And I identified a lot with her character's struggles. I didn't necessarily go through all the awkwardness that her character goes through, but some of the things like wanting to impress people, those are things I remember dealing with when I was in 8th grade myself. Charlize Theron, very great in Tully, and her portrayal of, you know, motherhood and the physical and emotional struggle of it, really spot on. And Constance Wu, excellent in Crazy Rich Asians. Probably one of the better romantic comedies in a long time, even if it does borrow a little too heavily from films like My Big Fat Greek Wedding or The Great Gatsby, and is quite predictable at times. It still is a much more pleasant experience than most romantic comedies have been for the last couple of years, especially since many of them are very cliched and predictable in a bad way. For Best Actor in a Motion Picture Drama, Bradley Cooper in A Star is Born, of course, and this is easily his best role to date. And in my opinion, I think he gave the greatest performance out of all the male leads from every film version of A Star is Born. He definitely felt like the most complex male lead of A Star is Born out of all the versions. And his singing and guitar playing, wow. He never really was a singer or a guitarist before this movie, and he had to take lessons specifically for both. But wow, I mean, he was better than quite a lot of singers we see today who are popular, like Blake Shelton and Adam Levine and people like that. Way better than both of them. Willem Dafoe in At Eternity's Gate, hands down the best lead actor performance of the year. He was fantastic as Vincent Van Gogh, even though he technically is too old to be playing him, since Vincent Van Gogh died at the age of 37 and Willem Dafoe is like 63. Normally that would fail. If I were judging this film for historical accuracy alone, that would come up as a big fail. But just performance-wise, he's just absolutely fantastic. He really takes you into the mind of Vincent Van Gogh, both as an artist and just as a human being in general, especially when he's struggling with his mental health, because Vincent Van Gogh famously had a lot of mental health problems, including depression, which led him to committing suicide. And the way the film showcases that is quite interesting and unique. And I'll discuss that more in my Best Films of the Year video, which it will definitely be in there. And Lucas Hedges was really fantastic in Boy Erased, and I'm glad to see he's finally got his first Golden Globe nomination after he was egregiously snubbed in Best Supporting Actor for Manchester by the Sea 2 years ago, although thankfully the Oscars rectified that mistake. And Rami Malek, fantastic in Bohemian Rhapsody. The movie itself was flawed in many ways, although it's not the worst movie ever, but Rami Malek was absolutely fantastic as Freddie Mercury. He nailed it. Like, he literally was Freddie Mercury. And then John David Washington, also fantastic in BlacKkKlansman. He definitely proves that talent does run in his family, because for those of you who don't know, he is Denzel Washington's son, and now he's literally following in his father's footsteps, not just by being an actor, but by working with some of the same directors that his father's worked with, like Spike Lee. So I can't wait to see where his career goes from here. And this is a very solid list overall. One person, though, who was egregiously snubbed was Ethan Hawke for First Reformed. Ethan Hawke in First Reformed, that is easily one of the best performances, if not maybe the best performance of his entire career, and the way he portrays this troubled priest who's dealing with health problems and who is taking up this environmentalist cause that one of his parishioners had taken up before he died, and dealing with all this stuff. I can't really say too much because it's really a film you should go into without too many details beyond basically what they show you in the trailer. Apart from the ending, which felt very, very abrupt and out of place, the whole movie is fantastic. And Ethan Hawke, it's a shame he hasn't really been getting more recognition outside of critic circles, because as we'll see in other videos, he's also gotten snubbed at a couple of other award shows. It truly is a tour de force of a performance, and while I'm glad many film critic groups have been recognizing it, it's a shame that most awards bodies haven't recognized it. So Oscars, it's up to you, and hopefully BAFTAs too, to throw some more recognition to Ethan Hawke's way. For Best Actress in a Motion Picture Drama, Glenn Close, really good in The Wife. It might not be a supreme masterpiece, but it's a solid film nonetheless. Lady Gaga, fantastic in A Star is Born. I had strong doubts about her casting when it was first announced, mainly because most of her previous acting projects were ones that kind of used her pop star image as part of the role, and I wasn't sure how well that would fit in with this because I haven't been the biggest fan of her music, and like many others, I wondered whether or not we even needed a new version of A Star is Born at all. But thankfully, the movie and her performance proved me wrong on all accounts, because my God, she was transcendent in this movie, and I honestly think she should win this category, and at the Oscars too. Nicole Kidman in Destroyer, didn't get to see it. It only opened in limited release recently. I don't know if it's going to come to my area. Melissa McCarthy in Can You Ever Forgive Me? Her best performance of her career so far, easily. And thank God this movie came out when it did, because after two back-to-back disasters with Life of the Party and The Happy Time Murders, she really needed a good movie, and here she really goes all out by, playing a real person, playing a character that's morally dubious, and really shutting off her comedic persona entirely. It's just amazing to behold. So bravo, Melissa McCarthy. And then Rosamund Pike in A Private War. Excellent performance, and I didn't expect this to get nominated because it hadn't really been generating a lot of buzz, but I'm glad it did, because while A Private War does fall into some of the cliches you see in journalism and war movies, Rosamund Pike is absolutely fantastic as Marie Colvin, and it's easily her best performance since Gone Girl. So this is overall a solid list, but the one big snub here is Viola Davis for Widows. The Widows, it's one movie I wish has done a lot better. Critics have loved it, but audiences haven't, and I suspect it's because it's not the high-octane action thriller that they probably thought it would be from its trailer. So this is not like a Fast and the Furious or Baby Driver. I guess that you could say this is more like the Ryan Gosling film Drive, in which there is action, but it's only a small part of the story. And despite a few shortcomings here and there, Widows is an absolutely fantastic movie. And Viola Davis, she is the true anchor of the film. You are with her from the start to the finish. You're invested in her with everything she's doing, and you just want to see how this is all going to turn out because you genuinely care about what's going to happen to her. And Viola Davis is easily among my top 5 favorite actresses working today, and I will see pretty much anything that she's in. And it's just a shame that this movie hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves, at least awards-wise. And then Best Director Motion Picture. A lot of great choices here. Spike Lee, very well deserved. Alfonso Cuarón, very well deserved. Bradley Cooper, very well deserved. Peter Farrelly for Green Book. It's definitely a movie that shows he can be a good director, especially for someone who's been primarily known for making raunchy comedies, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily Best Director of the Year material. Same with Adam McKay for Vice. Solid effort, but not necessarily worthy of this kind of recognition. Some contenders I would have liked to have seen in here are Damien Chazelle for First Man, Bo Burnham for 8th Grade, Yorgos Lanthimos for The Favorite. That one in particular I don't get being snubbed here because he's been getting all sorts of recognition from critics groups and other awards groups, and he's probably going to get an Oscar nomination too, and I hope that happens, but to snub him here, just disgraceful, absolutely disgraceful, especially since, for me, I haven't always been the biggest fan of his work in the past, even though I liked some of his other films, but The Favorite really, really impressed me in more ways than I thought it would. So, it's a shame he's not on here. And a number of other filmmakers could have been on here as well, like Marielle Heller for Can You Ever Forgive Me, Chloe Zhao for The Rider, Paul Schrader for First Reformed. I know a lot of people were surprised to see Barry Jenkins snubbed here for If Beale Street Could Talk. So yeah, I mean, there's tons of other directors who I think could have taken up those last two slots, but at least with Lee, Cuarón, and Cooper, I'm just glad those three are in. Oh, also some others I forgot. Is Julian Schnabel for At Eternity's Gate is another big one, who hasn't gotten a lot of recognition, but really deserves it, because I really, really loved At Eternity's Gate, and his direction was really sublime. And then finally, Best Motion Picture Comedy or Musical. Crazy Rich Asians, no surprise there. The Favorite, of course. Green Book, sure. Mary Poppins Returns, absolutely. And Vice, definitely, for the most part. Although I probably would have taken out either Crazy Rich Asians or Vice, just because they aren't as good as I wanted them to be, but they were still good nonetheless. And I probably would replace one of them with Sorry to Bother You, because that was a film, when I saw the trailer, I wasn't sure if I was going to like it, because it seemed like it was just going to be one of those bizarre films that try to call themselves comedies, because the trailer didn't really hint too much at what the film was about. But then when I finally saw it, I was really blown away by it. And apart from the last third maybe being a little too bizarre, and maybe taking a little too much inspiration from a certain Disney movie, and if you've seen the film, I think you'll know what Disney movie it parallels, and if you don't, and if you haven't seen the film, you should at least watch it so you can see if you can pick up on which Disney film they might be referencing. I don't know if that was their point or not, but it was something I noticed. But yeah, it was really surprising and really well written, well acted, well directed, so I would have liked to have seen it in there, and I'm sure a lot of people would have loved to have seen Love, Simon in here, and I can't argue against that, because that was a really good coming-of-age movie, and of course it was historic in the fact that this was like the first major studio teen comedy featuring a gay character as its main protagonist. And while I'm not gay myself, I was certainly very much invested in Simon's journey throughout the film, and just hoping that he got his happy ending. And of course, if you've seen the film, you know exactly what happens. And then finally, Best Motion Picture Drama. Still a pretty solid list for the most part. I mean, Black Panther, no one's surprised about that. BlacKkKlansman, absolutely. Bohemian Rhapsody, I wouldn't go that far and say it deserves a nomination in a Best Picture category, but at least for Rami Malek's performance, it absolutely does. If Beale Street Could Talk and A Star Is Born, definitely that. I also wish there had been some room for films like First Man or The Hate You Give. Or Can You Ever Forgive Me, or On Chesil Beach. That's a film I haven't mentioned at all, which I kept forgetting to up until this point. That's a film that has really flown under the radar and really deserves a lot of awards attention, because it has amazing acting, amazing writing, amazing directing, amazing cinematography. It's a really amazing film, and I just wish more people were talking about it, because it's one of those under the radar films that I think a lot of people will, in retrospect, feel should have gotten a lot more attention, not just from critics and audiences, but also from awards as well. And also, I can't believe I just forgot this. 8th Grade, that should have been nominated in the comedy or musical category. That easily should have gotten a nomination there. And so those are my thoughts I have on the Golden Globes. Like I said before, I'm sorry I couldn't get this video out earlier. And since we only have a couple of days to go before the big show, let me know in the comments section below what you think of the Golden Globe nomination, and also what your big surprises and snubs are. But overall, this is a pretty solid list of nominations. A lot of good films that I really liked are getting a lot of well-deserved recognition, although there are some pretty shocking snubs too, particularly Ethan Hawke. How that performance didn't get nominated here, I will never know. But let me know in the comment section below what you think of these nominations, as well as what surprised you and what you think got snubbed. And be sure to subscribe to my channel and click the notification bell to get all my newest videos when they're uploaded. And I will see you guys next time. Bye!